Hey folks, it's Dave here in Studio C again, and we're going to take a look at penalties in shootout hockey, as this is probably the most confusing thing in the game is the penalties. So I'm going to try to clarify a few things, show you what I know, and show you how I handle some things. First things first, if you don't have the shootout cards from drive-through cards, these things are fantastic. I mean, look at these things. They're just gorgeous how these are. So if you ever get a chance, go to drive-through cards and get the shootout cards. They really make all the difference in the world when playing this on your tabletop. And I think I got a video on my channel of these cards, but again, they are just absolutely gorgeous. All right, let's run through the penalties on the cards here. Let me show you what we have here on the cards. So for Boston, as you can see, they have ratings T, R, T. Now see how the Z3? The Z3 is different than a Z, okay? So keep that in mind. See, O'Reilly has the Z, Jonathan has a Z3, and Secord has a Z2. So they're all very different from each other. So keep that in mind. And then the rest of the letters are pretty self-explanatory, but it does get confusing when you get an X2 and an X, or a Z2 and a Z, or a Z3 and a Z. They're all different values. Now over here with Buffalo, we don't have to worry about that. There's no Z2s or X2s or Y2s or anything like that. But on Boston, you got to keep this in mind, that if there's a penalty on Z3, it's Z3 only. It's not Z or Z2. And if there's a penalty on X, it would be a penalty on X here and here, but not on X2. Now the little numbers off to the side, this is your fight rating. These are the players who are going to get in the fights, okay? Now O'Reilly obviously fought a lot, so he's 1 and 2. Jonathan would be 3, Secord 4, and Winsink is 5. Now on Buffalo, they don't have a 1. They have a 2, a 3, a 4, and a 5, and I'll explain how that comes into play a little bit later. So let's go over some penalty scenarios. Now, there's an easy way and a hard way to do penalties. The easy way is if you're not keeping penalty stats, there's a real easy way to do penalties, okay? So we'll run through that first. All right, now, as usual, when playing shootout, you need to flip a card, check for time, and then flip another card to check for the scoring chance or the penalty, and then from there, you would flip to see who got the scoring chance, if there was, and then again, keep on flipping to see where it came from. So the idea is you want to keep flipping new cards every time. You never want to flip a card and say, oh, that's a scoring chance for Q from the slot, it's a goal. No, never do anything off the same card twice. Always flip a new card. That's how the game is designed, okay? So what we're going to do is, let's say you were just getting a final score and you were not keeping penalty stats, okay? So you flip a card here and there's 0 minutes off the clock, okay? And then you come over here and you're going to get a penalty home. All right, so that's going to be a penalty on Buffalo. Okay, now our next card is this right here. So there's going to be a penalty on W and then on Y2. So we look now, Buffalo has Martin, Sealing, and Schoenfield. Okay, so they got 3 W's on the team. So what's going to happen is all 3 of these players will get penalties. If you're using just the basic mode of the game, or meaning you're not keeping penalty stats, all you need to do is write down penalty for Buffalo. You don't have to worry about 3 penalties. It's just 1 penalty for Buffalo. And then Boston would be on the man advantage for 2 flips. So here's your first flip on the power play, and then here's your second flip on the power play. Obviously, there's be a penalty here. But you get where I'm going here. So how it works out is that they don't have a Y2, so we don't have to worry about it. Again, this is a Y with a 2 for fighting, so that's not a Y2. That's just a straight Y. So with the W's, each of these players would get a penalty. However, if you're not keeping penalty stats, as I do a lot of times when I'm just trying to get a final score for a game and I really don't care who got the penalties, I would just consider this a power play for Boston and move on. It's that simple. Okay? Now, if you are keeping penalty stats, it gets a little bit more difficult, but it's not terrible. So what you would do is you would write down penalties for Martin, Sealing, and Schoenfeld. They would all get a minor penalty for whatever you wanted to call it. Roughing, tripping, you can make up your mind whatever you want to be. You're the official scorer. It still would only be a one-man advantage for 2 minutes for Boston. Okay, so these 3 penalties would only count as 1 power play, but they would be in the stats in the box score for penalties. So at some point during the game or that period, they killed off, or they had 3 penalties, I should say. All right. How this works out is that if you're doing like a season replay or series replay, at the end of that replay, the penalty should come out fairly accurate. Okay, now if you're looking at the game box score, you might end up with a ton of penalties in a game box score, which looks unrealistic. But in the overall picture, if you're playing a bigger project, that's what you're looking at. So look at this not as an individual game, but as an overall picture of, these penalties, even though you might get a lot of these in one game, they will average out over the course of a season. Because you might get some games where you get no penalties, which really never happened in 79-80, of course. But that's how it balances out. So some games you might be heavy on the penalties, and some games you might be light on the penalties. So it's kind of an overall average of penalties. So again, if you were just keeping score, don't worry about the individual penalties. Mark it as 1 power play for Boston and get on with your game. If you are keeping stats, you still mark it as 1 power play, but you would record the 3 players with the W, and they would all get minor penalties. So at the end of the game, these three players would all have minor penalties. So that's how that would work there. Now, let's talk about some of the major penalties now, all right? So there's a couple ways that this can happen. So the first way is to flip a card here, and you got a penalty away, all right? So we're going to check a penalty for Boston, okay? Now, if I were to flip this one here, it would say penalty on X and Y2. So I come over here, and I look, and I do have an X, and I don't have a Y2, so I actually have 2 X's. So Mike Milbury and Rick Smith would get penalties for Boston. And you would proceed in the same way that we just talked about. If you're not keeping penalty stats, just count it as a power play for Buffalo. If you are keeping penalty stats, record penalties for each of the guys, and it's still a one-man advantage for Buffalo. Now, if you got a penalty away, and then you flipped this, penalty B. So what happens now is that this is going to be potentially a double minor, a major, a fight, or a major misconduct, okay? That's when you get into your heavy-duty penalties, let's say. So this is what we flipped here for Boston, so we got a penalty B. So let's check penalty B. So now we flip the next card, and this is what we get. We get Z2, 5 minutes for slashing. So Al Secord is a Z2, so Secord gets a 5-minute major for slashing. And you handle the majors just like you do in the NHL. That's 5 flips, 5 cards, because each card is a 1-minute flip on a power play. So you would get 5 of those. And if Buffalo were to score on this major penalty, he still stays in the box. Okay, the major penalties do not end on a goal. So Buffalo would get 5 flips on the man advantage, and unless another penalty occurred, and then things would change. So that's how the major penalties work right there. Now, if we were to flip something that they didn't have, let's just say, I'm trying to find something that they don't have with Boston. Okay, let's just say it was Buffalo. Okay, so Buffalo got the major penalty. Buffalo got the penalty, so let's back this up and try to do this the right way. Okay, so we flip. It was penalty home, penalty on Buffalo. All right, then we flip, and it's penalty B. And then we come over here, and we set Z2, 5 minutes for slashing. Well, there's no Z2, so there is no penalty. So he slashed somebody and got away with it, is how the rules are written. So there's no penalty here. And that goes the same for minor penalties. So if you were to look over here, and you had a minor penalty check, and you were looking for R and Z, if there's no R and Z, then there's no penalty. Now, in this case, there is, okay? But let me show you this right here. See if I got a team here that has no R and a Z. Let's see. So if I had Vancouver here, and they had, so let's see, they do have a Y2, but let's just say it was just W. There's no W here, so there's no penalty. So basically what I'm getting at is on a penalty check, whether it's A or B, if there's no player with that value on the team you're checking, there's no penalty. You just play on the referee missed it, okay? So hopefully this is making sense. Now, another thing to check here. So now you got the major penalty. Penalty B, home and away. So now we're going to check both teams for a major penalty. This gets kind of tricky too, but see if you can follow along. The easiest thing that could happen is you get something like a fight. All right, so let me see here. So I'm going to let me pull up my fighting card here. Okay, so the easiest thing to do is you get a penalty B, home and away. You flip the first card and you check visitors first. And it's 2 and 2, 5 minutes for fighting. So that's a piece of cake. You look at number 2, which is O'Reilly. You look over here for 2, and it's Playfair. So O'Reilly and Playfair each get 5 minutes for fighting. We're done. All right, that's the major penalty. You do not need to check any more than that. So we got a, so this was our card, penalty B, home and away. We check the visitors first, and it's a fight, and a fight, that ends it right there. So both teams get 5 for fighting, and we play on. If you got this right here, and it was penalty B, home and away, and you check the visitor first, okay, and it was something like this. W, 2 and 2 for a high stick. So this is a double minor on W, and so that would be Miller. So Miller would get 2 and 2 for a high stick. However, you still have to check the major penalty for the home team. So make a mental note of this, because if you flip this and it becomes a fight, this cancels out. So if on either check you get a fight, that's it. There's no other penalties besides the fight. So the high stick goes away. There's no penalty on Miller. The fight takes precedence. And again, it's going to be 2 versus 2. So that would be O'Reilly and Playfair on the fight. And so the major penalties can get a little confusing because this penalty actually washes out in case there's a fight. So that's how the major penalties work. Let's see. A couple other scenarios here. Okay, so let's do this here. So we got a penalty home and away. All right. And now let's just say that we did that same thing. We did a Z3 for Boston. We're checking the major penalty now. Z3 for Boston. And Stan Jonathan now gets a high stick. Okay. So now we check Buffalo. And we roll, and again, 5 and a 5 for fighting. It cancels out Jonathan's 5-minute major for high sticking, and 5 would be Winsink, would be fighting Sean Field, and that would cancel out the penalty, so we have the fighting majors. Now, there is a chance that there's no fight, okay? So let's just say that we have a penalty home. It is a penalty B, and there's a fight. Okay, so this is going to be a Buffalo fight. And we flip this. So this is 2 versus 1, 5 for fighting, and a 10-minute misconduct. So for Boston 2, it's O'Reilly. For Buffalo, there's no 1. So there's no fight. I believe this is how it works because you were flipping on the Buffalo card for the fight. They do not have a 1, so there's no fight. Okay, so we just play on. Now, let's back this up. So, you get the penalty away. Okay, penalty away. Flip, it's a penalty B. Come over here, fight. So now you're checking Boston. Boston has a 2. This is O'Reilly. Okay, now there's no 1 on Buffalo. Okay, now some people might say, okay, well, there's no 1, so there's no fight. Again, you're the official scorer. If that's how you want to do it, that's fine. But I believe how the rules are written is that because the team we're checking does have a 2, he is going to get a fight happening. So if there's no 1 on the team, then you go to the next number, which would be 2. So it would be O'Reilly fighting Playfair again. So I believe that's how the fights work, is that the team you're checking, if that number checks in, there is a fight. Whereas, again, if we were checking Buffalo first, let's just say, let's swap the teams here. Okay, so Buffalo is the away team. We got penalty away, penalty B. We checked for the fight, and we do have a 2. So that would, but if it was a 1 and a 2, or a 1 and a 1, let's see if I can find a 1 and a 1. Okay, yeah, here we go. So we flip 1 and a 1 in a fight. There's no 1 on Buffalo because we are checking Buffalo first. There's no 1, so there's no fight. Okay, so the team you're checking first has to have this guy here. I believe that's how it works, is you have the guy who's starting the fight and the guy who's going to get fought. Okay, so if there's no guy starting the fight, then there's no fight. I believe that's how the major penalties work. Okay, now a couple other things here. So let's throw Hartford in the mix here. Okay, so you roll penalty home for Hartford, and then you got T and Z3 for Hartford. So again, you get 3 guys here for Hartford with a T. So Carroll, Johnston, and Howe are all going to get minor penalties. They're going to be recorded in the box score. And again, it just results in 1 power play, even though you got all 3. Okay. Now, if you were to roll again, so you got another penalty home, and then you roll something like this, it's going to be X and Y too. Oh boy, so now Bennett and Hangsblin are going to be in the box. Okay, so now Hartford was shorthanded. We flipped on the first roll, the first minute of the penalty. We got another penalty home, and it's another penalty. So now you're going to get 1 flip of a 2-man advantage for Buffalo. Okay, because again, it's 2 flips for a penalty. We flipped once, so we're in the middle of the first penalty. They picked up another one, so now it's going to be a 5-on-3, assuming that we were 5-on-5 to start this whole thing. So the next Buffalo flip, you'd give even more of a power play advantage because it's 5-on-3. So let's just say we flipped, nothing happened. It goes now, man's out of the box, so now it's a 5-on-4. We flip again. If nothing happens, then everyone's out of the box. So the penalties do stack, okay? So let's just say now that Hartford gets a penalty, a man in the box. Buffalo flips, they get a penalty. So now there's 1 flip of 4-on-4 because they each have a man in the box. After that flip, Hartford would get 1 flip on the man advantage because their guy come out. So the penalties do stack, just like an NHL game. This guy's in the box, they get a penalty. They're playing even strength until this guy comes out of the box. Now they have an abbreviated power play until this guy comes out of the box. So that's how the penalties would work. So hopefully that clarified a few things. So anyway, just to recap, if you get a penalty call, penalty home, you flip another card to see what the penalty is. If there's no match, there's no penalty. If there is a match, then the player gets a penalty, and it's served, no matter how many people have the symbols. Okay, you could have 6 players over here, 3 X's and 3 Y2s over here. It's still going to just be 1 power play. The rest are just going to be in the box score for stats. And again, they will average out over the season. So don't fret if you get a ton of penalties in one game, because the next game you might not get any. Okay, so that's kind of how that works. Again, you have to find somebody with a symbol to get a penalty. Again, penalty home and away B is when you check on the major penalties. And penalty B is over here in a slot, and a lot of times it's going to be a fight or something like that. So hopefully that clarified some of the penalties, the penalty issues here going on in shootout. I don't want to say issues, but they can get a little confusing here. But again, you are the official scorer, so you get the last say in what happens. In fact, the other night I played a game and I kept flipping penalty. And finally I just stopped recording. I said, no, there's no more penalties. It's getting out of hand. So I would just flip another card and check. Because as the official scorer, I just didn't think a team would get that many penalties in one game. And so I did. I as the official scorer, I just flipped another card and got through the game. So again, it's your game. Play it your way. But hopefully this clarifies some of the penalty issues, or penalty rules in shootout hockey. I'm Dave. I'll talk to everybody later. Bye-bye.